Good morning, stampers and crafters. Welcome to Tina's Crafty Ink Spot. I have another technique quickie for you today. Now, I've done this technique. It's been years, and it's even in my technique ring. There's 3 ways to do it here in my technique ring. If you have it, then you have that technique. If you're looking for different ways and different techniques, I do sell this technique ring. You'll find it under techniques and ideas on my blog. Anyway, we are going to do a quickie technique today called shadow stamping. And I have figured out or found 4 different ways to do that. And I'm going to show you those today. And at the end of or at the bottom of the blog post, I'll put some cards I've made doing the technique different ways. So let's jump right in. What you will need, you definitely need your stamparatus for this to come out. It's much easier if you do use your stamparatus. I'm just going to grab a basic image, these leaves right here in botanical layers. So let's grab those. They're a nice solid image, so it'll be easy to do. So the first way, let me grab a piece of, just a little scrap piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to line this up on, pick a spot to line it up on your squares. And that'll kind of help you when it's time to move it to do the shadow. So this first way, I didn't even get it on the line there. Okay, so this first way, I'm going to put our leaves in here. And I'm just going to do it in kind of a sepia is how this one will turn out. And I'm just going to use soft suede. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp the image in soft suede first. Ink it up real well. Might have to stamp that twice. For some reason I've been doing this all morning, so I think my stamp may need to be kind of washed under the sink or something. Alright, so we're going to stamp our image. Make sure we got it. Now, see, I did miss some. So that's okay. We're in the stamparatus, so I can just re-ink it. I think what I need to do to get a nice clear image is, if you have that happening, is to put Versamark onto your stamp to kind of condition it. But because of the way I'm doing this technique, I really didn't want to put Versamark on it. And you'll see why in a minute. Okay, we got a nice dark image there. Now I'm going to dry that before I proceed to the next step. So let me just grab my heat tool and let's dry it a little bit. Get my heat gun over here. I want to make sure it's nice and dry. And now I'm going to need that ink. I'm going to wipe this off. Then I'm going to take my embossing buddy. This is real important. And make sure that's nice and dry. And there. Now, since I have it right on the square there, I'm going to move it about almost halfway to the next line. Okay, put it back in place. We're still lined up here. Now I'm going to grab my Versamark, ink up my stamp, and we're going to stamp right over it. And now it's offset, because remember we moved our paper. I'm going to do that one more time just so I have a nice coating. Now I'm going to bring in my white embossing powder. This is one, there's 4 ways I'm going to show you. This is one of my favorites. There's 2 that are my favorites, and I'll let you know those as we go along. So now we've got white embossing powder on there. Put that back. Move my embossing powder away from my heat gun. Yes, I've done that many times. Now we're going to heat set that. God, I love heat embossing. I love to watch it change. Okay, now we're all heat set. And let's see, right? Well, wait for it. And move this off here. Now I'm going to bring in my blending brush. I'm going to use the same soft suede. And I'm going to go right over it. We're going to do an emboss resist right over it. And of course I love soft suede because it kind of gives you that whole sepia look. So I'm making sure I cover the whole image. Or around, the sides of the whole image. Of course, you can take, more time doing this where it's not all blotchy like I'm doing here, but I'm trying to just make a point. Now, we're just going to take a Kleenex, and we're going to buff off that white embossing powder. How cool is that, right? Gives you that whole kind of sepia antique look. Love it. Alright, so that's the first way. Now, let me close these up. The second way, we're going to stamp the image in a lighter color, and then we're going to stamp the image in a darker color, slightly offset the main image. Okay? So, let me clean this off. I'm going to bring in a piece of colored cardstock because this works so well on colored cardstock. So we're just going to use, what is this? This is shaded spruce. Okay? So I'm going to line it up on one of my squares again. Just because it gives me, if you're really good at eyeing your stamps, you could do this without your stamp apparatus. So now, I'm going to take my image. Okay, now I'm going to stamp it in the lighter color, which is going to be a white. Okay, use the Stampin' Up! Craft White ink. And we're going to ink up our stamp. Got a nice image there. Again, I'm going to dry it. Because you know how white ink, doesn't always dry right away. So I'm going to make sure that's nice and dry. Then clean off my stamp. Let me get another white. White ink just really gets down in the crevices of your stamp. Because it's so juicy. Hopefully I got most of that. Okay, now I'm going to take the same color as the cardstock. I'm going to take shaded spruce. I'm going to move my image half a square. Okay, it should be lined up perfectly. Now I'm going to ink it with the shaded spruce. Oops, missed some of it. And we're going to stamp right over it. Look at that. Isn't that cool? Now, if you don't want it offset that far, you just don't move it as far. Okay? So you could do it closer in, and if you wanted to do that, I'd do about 1/3 of the square. Okay? Matter of fact, let's do it that way and see if we want to do it a little bit closer. But what we can do is we'll do the second way is to either stamp your image in Versamark or the same color cardstock. Okay, when you stamp Versamark on colored cardstock, it just makes a dark image. Okay, but if you do Versamark directly on the paper before you do your white, you have to make sure that Versamark is very, very dry, because I'm going to show you why. I don't know if that made sense. Hopefully it did. Okay, so right here you can use Versamark or you can use the colored ink. Okay, if you use Versamark for this part, which will just give you a dark image, make sure that Versamark is very dry before we put the white on, because we're going to white emboss over this. Okay, so it's your choice right here. Either do the same colored ink or do Versamark. And the only reason I'm not doing Versamark is because then I gotta wait for it to dry, I gotta do all that stuff. So we're just going to stamp it in the same color. If you don't have the same color of ink as your cardstock, then use the Versamark. Just make sure it's very, very dry. Okay, let me ink that up a little better. I want a nice shadow. There we go, look at that. Now, I'm only going to move my paper about 1/3 of a square. Okay? Just barely moving it off. And we'll clean off our stamp. You definitely want to make sure this stage is clean because you're going to be putting your white ink pad into it. So now we're going to take our white ink pad, ink it up real well. And now we'll stamp over it. Now in this spot, if you want, what you can do, instead of the white ink, is you can do white embossing. Okay? So this is the same, but you can do white embossing right there. Probably should have done that, and that way I would have showed you. So you can do Versamark and Versamark with white emboss. Now this last way, we are going to do the Versamark way. Okay, we'll try it the Versamark way, and I'll show you the issue with that. Let me turn this around so I'll be able to move it. I'm going to line it up on one of my squares. So let's do the two Versamark ways, okay? So grab our Versamark. See how that gives you your nice dark image? I'm going to do it one more time so it's nice and dark. There we go. Let's lean off our stamp. Let me get up. and we're going to dry this Versamark. We need to hit it with our heat tool and make sure it's nice and dry. Okay, now you're going to hit it with your embossing buddy. That'll also help dry it and make that Versamark so it's not sticky. Now we're going to move our image, the little, shift it a third of a square. Okay. Now we're going to hit the Versamark again. Make sure that's nice and dry. Because if you don't, your embossing powder will just stick to that one also, and you don't want it to. We're going to ink that up. We're going to stamp it. And we can do the white embossing powder, or we can do clear. And it's going to give you a little bit different shadow stamp. So let's grab our clear. And I'll show you how that looks if you do clear over that. You could do the white like we did here also, but we're going to do the clear and see what I mean about how your powder sticks to the other. So what you do, let me grab a brush. I'm just going to grab a soft brush and maybe knock some of that off in the part I didn't want. So that, now a lot of people do it this way, and I find I don't like it because I have to do this. Because that Versamark, no matter what you do, just doesn't seem to get all the way dry. I mean, I guess if you let it set overnight, maybe it would. Or you can just sit here and knock it off, which I rather do one of the easier ways than doing that. Alright, so now we'll clear emboss it. Move my embossing powder away from my heat tool. You know, you only hit your pile of powder once with a heat tool before you remember. Alright, let's try it this way. See how it turns out. See, it just gives it just a little bit different type of shadow. See what I'm saying? So you have shiny and then you have a shadow. Okay? And then you have your stamped with the white, your Versamark with the white. You have your ink first with the white. Let's see, why don't we do, let's do the color and the white emboss. Let's try that. So we haven't done that yet. So there's like multiple little ways you can do this, and that's what I wanted to show you today. So let's do our same color tone on tone ink, and this does work best on you know, dark cardstock. Okay, so let's do a dark. I'm going to hit that one more time so it's nice and dark. Love it. Okay, now we're going to dry it a little, and then we'll white emboss over that one and see how it looks. So let me clean my stamp. I've been doing this kind of several times today, so I really need to you know, take my stamp to the kitchen sink and clean it real well. Okay, so now we're going to offset just a little bit. Just a little bit. Now we'll hit it with the Versamark. Okay, we got our Versamark on there. Now we're going to hit it with white embossing powder. I just had the white in my hand. Where'd it go? That's the clear. Okay, here's the white. See, and the problem with putting the embossing powder over the ink, see how the embossing powder is sticking to the wet ink? I did it once earlier, and the way I did it was I had left to go make my husband lunch, and I guess the Versamark or the ink sitting that long dried finally. So you just got to make sure this ink is really, really dry. So here's the pros and the cons. I'll show you them. I just am not doing as well with the embossing powder. Yeah, see, I'm more this one. This one, and then the embossing powder on white. I like that a lot. I mean, you can achieve the same thing apparently several different ways, but I just wanted to show you the pros and the cons of doing this different shadow stamping. See, I don't like that one as well at all because I couldn't get all of my embossing powder off that ink. So let's try a different thing. Okay, let's do the embossing powder first. Let's try that. Let's try the embossing powder and then do the shadow. So let's go ahead and put that there. Put it on a line. So let's do our embossing powder first. My dad used to say this is just something like several ways to skin a cat. I don't know where that came from or what it meant, other than there's several ways to do something, but it was, I remember my dad saying that the first time, and I was little, real little, and I thought that meant he was going to go skin my cat. Okay, so let's do the white embossing powder. Probably should have used my embossing buddy. Oh, I don't need that on there. Let's heat set it. Oh, and you know what I did? I moved it off of my thing, but you know what? That's okay. We're going to see if we can line it up. I was just trying all these different ways today, and I thought, you know what, I'll share that. Alright, so I've moved it off. So what we're going to do is see if we can line up our stamp. So we're just going to move it slightly off. Slightly offset. I probably have my head in the camera, I'm sorry. And now we're going to stamp it with the dark ink. So do as I say, not as I do, just saying. Alright. Ink this up real well. Then we'll stamp it. And then what we'll do, I'm going to stamp that one more time. That came out perfect. I'm going to get it a little bit darker. And then I'm going to take a Kleenex and clean off my white. But it didn't clean off, it smeared. There we go. So we're going to buff off our white. And we end up with our shadow. How cool is that? So, which way do you like best? I mean, okay, I definitely love this. I love the sepia. This is the white embossed over the brown and then sponged. I love that look. The clear stamped over the Versamark image, I like that one. I like this one. This right here, pain in the tushy. I'm not saying I like that, because this is where we tried to do the Versamark over it. Okay, this is the dark and then just white stamped. I don't know. What's your vote? I mean, I do like the white embossing, and then you can see the shadow behind it, which is kind of what we did here. So I think it has to do with the sequence in what you do it. This one, the simplest. Stamp your dark ink, stamp your light ink. And I really like that way that one turned out. Okay, the white's a little bold. Maybe if you had the same color embossing powder maybe, but then you would end up with just this. Anyway, there is a few different ways to do shadow stamping. Go play with it. Let me know what you think, or if you think of a different way to, you know, get those inks or that embossing powder to dry faster, because I've tried hitting it with the heat tool. Like I said, the only time I didn't have trouble with it, I had left the room and, you know, went and made lunch or something and had time to dry. So this is the dark ink, then the light. This is the light, then the dark, and then buffed. And here's the clear embossing. I'm going to vote for this one. I really like that rustic look. Now, I did do this technique here, and I really liked how it turned out. I did that I did a smushing background on some watercolor paper, and then stamped my leaf, and I just really kind of liked that look. I did do the same technique of the shadow stamping, doing a pumpkin too. I kind of like the way that looks. I like the aesthetics of it. But there is your quickie technique. Shadow stamping done 4 different ways. I hope you have a happy stamping day. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.